Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our session this morning on Hidden Migrants, the Undocumented, which is about raising awareness of the undocumented in our community, and it's about working together to coordinate support that they might need. Watford was recently announced as the best place in Ireland to live and work. We want to ensure that this applies to every resident of Waterford. Our purpose today is to identify resources available in the area and what we can do together to improve the lives of the undocumented. We have some undocumented residents joining us online today through hubs set up in the area and through community outreach. We would ask that you respect their anonymity and dignity throughout this process. Waterford Integration Services recognises that there are many barriers that prevent people from accessing and maintaining stable migration status, even when they have lived in Ireland for many years, or even those that have been born here. Our experience is that most undocumented migrants have lost their status through no particular fault of their own, for a number of reasons. Paperwork may have lapsed due to prohibitive cost of renewal, unemployment, lack of access to affordable legal advice, the complexity of immigration rules, and the length of time that applications take. These are further compounded by language and cultural barriers. We must be aware of the impacts to individuals and their extended family members who rely mainly on the status of the head of household. So if the head of household loses their status, then that impacts on the whole family. Undocumented migrants are open to exploitation and do not have the protections of health and safety, regular working hours, holiday entitlements, and guaranteed payments. There is an overrepresentation in exploitative and precarious and low-paid work. We must look at opportunities to coordinate services and support to assist those most in need, to understand and dismantle barriers of structural discrimination and exclusion facing migrants, and challenge the dominant power structures in their workplaces and their communities. There is a lack of data to determine the relevant issues, such as numbers of undocumented in the area, the type of work and contracts that they may have. So are they temporary, permanent, full-time, part-time? But also the levels of unemployment and socioeconomic determinants of health and housing needs, discrimination and exclusion. So we really need to be looking at data in these areas. Intersectional data then, we need to look at indicators of gender identity, sexual orientation, educational background, immigration status, age, disability status, race and ethnicity, for example. We welcome you all here this morning, and especially to our guest speakers, and we know that you're going to enjoy what they have to say today. We also welcome the latest initiative of the Irish government to introduce a regularisation scheme to assist those who are currently undocumented in Ireland, and look forward to the presentations from our guest speakers, and most importantly from you, the participants who are here with us today. I would now like to hand you over to Dr. Alison Kennelly from WIT, who's going to be our moderator for this session this morning. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you very much, Anne, for your very warm welcome and your introduction to the session. I'm delighted to be here with you all today, and I'm really looking forward to listening to our speakers and hopefully finding a way that we can move together as a community here in Waterford and in the South East. So just to say, my role in WIT is a new role, and I am the new Vice President for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. And this is a new role within Waterford Institute of Technology. And I think higher education really, and higher education institutions, we have a critical role to play in trying to lead the charge for change in this area across the region, and in terms of making higher education truly accessible to all members of our community. And currently in WIT, we are engaging with the University of Sanctuary Initiative, which is a really important initiative. And this week we welcomed a report from the Higher Education Authority on race and ethnicity in higher education. And there is a lot of work happening in our sector on this area. So I think this is a really timely event. So I really look forward to hopefully being inspired by our speakers today and seeing maybe how we can work together into the future on various initiatives. So on to the business end of proceedings. We have a lot of speakers today. We've got 10 minutes per speaker, and I'm going to stick to this very rigorously in the interest of ensuring that every voice and every speaker here today will be heard and will be given equal time. So once the 10 minutes is up, I will ask the speakers to finish up. Obviously, if any speakers are finished early, then please, we can ask questions. But if not, I know we have a questions and answer session at the end scheduled for 12:30. And finally, then, I just would like to thank everybody who organised today's event, and a special word of mention to Anne Nolan from Waterford Integration Services, and also to Sinead O'Higgins, who has provided technical support from Waterford Libraries and Europe Direct Waterford over the past couple of days. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, and our first speaker is Adida Dalla, and he is the current outreach coordinator with the International Organisation for Migration Ireland. Before joining the International Organisation for Migration in Ireland, he worked on the implementation, and you have to correct my pronunciation here, of WASAIA, which is an African diaspora-led development organisation based in Ireland, which he co-founded in 2010 and was working mainly in Africa. He has been championing community education and development projects in Africa and in Ireland, addressing the discrimination of minority groups, with a particular focus on women, young people and children affected by violence, conflict and poverty, as part of his personal commitment for social justice and equality. And he has taught for several years in Maynooth University in the adult education department on trends and migration issues. And he has also worked with the SPIR ASI Ireland for many years as a manager of the Centre for Education and Integration of Migrants, and previously taught philosophy and canon law in Kimmage Institute of Theology in Dublin and in the Catholic University of Congo. So I am really looking forward to hearing from you, and I will hand over to you now.
Thanks very much, Dr. Allison, and thanks very much, Anne, for the opportunity that you've given to our organization to speak about our program and about our organization. We've been looking forward really to this event, and it has been a very good collaboration between your organization and our own organization. I believe a lot of participants in this forum have somehow heard about IOM and also the program that we run. But for me, it's a real opportunity really today to be able to also hear from you and discuss about and get your feedback about the program that we run. But at the same time, it's an opportunity to give a kind of background of the rationale of the program that we deliver for migrants in Ireland. IOM, as you all know, it's the International Organization for Migration. But before we become the International Organization for Migration, since 1951, after the big crisis of the aftermath of the World War II, there were big crises, global crises, where people were living, especially from Europe, leaving Europe and going to seek refuge or look for places where they could have good life. So it was important, and it was imperative that at that time a global body that come to regulate this big or mass movement of people from Europe and going mainly to Southern America, North Africa, Southern Africa. A lot of people waste their lives by crossing the sea because of famine and because of precarity. So IOM came to be in 1951, at that time as an intergovernmental committee for the movement of migrants from Europe to assist post-war refugees and displaced persons. And the trend changed across the years with globalization, with kind of internal war, and there were more needs where there were more internal displaced people. So we became then the International Organization for Migration. And since 2016, we joined the UN body as a related migration organization. What do we do? First of all, our mission, we believe, IOM, we believe that the principle of humane, orderly migration benefit migrants and the society as a whole. So as the leading international organization for migration, IOM acts with its partners in the international community to assist in meeting the growing operational challenges of migration management. Also to advance understanding of migration issues to encourage social and economic development through migration, and finally, to unfold the human dignity and well-being of migrants. In brief, what we believe that migrants are first human beings, and migration comes with a lot of challenges. And we have seen, especially in the last maybe decades, how a lot of people have been losing their life by trying to reach Europe, crossing the sea, and every day we record a large number of people really losing their lives in the Mediterranean. There are a lot of people coming from sub-Saharan Africa, trying to cross the desert, and they're losing their lives in the desert. There are so many people who are trafficked, so many people who are smuggled, and this needs an international body that can act between states to regulate that. So even if people are moving, going to places, we believe that the integrity, human integrity, must be kept. That's why IOM is there, really to protect migrants and also to work with the states to make sure that migration does not affect the integrity of people who are moving to one place from one place to another as human beings. So because of that, we run a lot of projects. IOM is mainly a project-based organization. We work with different states. We have about 173 states who are members of IOM, but we also with different international bodies like the International Red Cross, and we work with NGOs, local NGOs as our key partners, because we cannot do this work without the contribution of different organizations, but also the contribution of migrants themselves. We work very closely with diaspora organizations to make sure that what we are receiving, what we are negotiating with the state comes from the real need. So because of that, we have, especially in different countries, but I'm going to come back to what we deliver here in Ireland. In different countries, we work on counter trafficking, make sure that people who are in need of migration, they are not exploited either for labor purpose or for sexual exploitation. We work on labor migration, supporting people moving from their country of origin for the purpose of seeking employment. In Ireland, for example, in the past, we also ran that program here on labor migration for Irish people going abroad, mainly in Australia, looking for a job. We will facilitate the work permit process. We will facilitate the travel process. And we run this program in different countries. Maybe soon we're going to implement that project also here in Ireland, trying to support other people who probably come here for international protection, but they may not be qualified for that. Instead of coming for international protection, they can come here for the purpose of work. Mass information and integration, migration health services, especially in countries where there are a lot of difficulties. We run program on health, and especially mental health. It's huge. As you know, a lot of migrant people coming through different routes, they sustain a lot of mental health. So we have specialized ourselves in supporting mental health for migrants. Assisted voluntary return, I'm going to come back to that because this is one of the main programs that we run here in Ireland. Technical cooperation with different bodies, migration research. All the work that we do must be evidence-based. So we run a lot of research, and we have an entire body that only focus on research on migration. Movement processing and assistance. In Ireland, for example, we work also on a resettlement program. This is part of movement processing and assistance. As you know, a lot of Syrians lately are coming here, and now even some Afghans. So IOM works with the Department of Justice, with the government, to make sure that whenever migrants are coming here, they are well supported, and we are in charge of the displacement of these people. Emergency and post-conflict, and this is mainly in most of the countries in Africa, Asia, where there are conflicts and war, and other special programs. I'm going to now talk about voluntary return because this is one of the main programs that we deliver in IOM Ireland. And since IOM Ireland, we started, we were invited in Ireland in 2001. And the main program that the government wanted us to support, it was voluntary return. And this is probably a program that not very much welcomed by migrants because they are associated with repatriation or may call it soft deportation. But the philosophy of voluntary return for IOM, we believe that migration, it has different stages. And at some stage, migration may not work well for migrants. And at that, in that occasion, migrants may choose to return themselves voluntarily to their country of origin. And at that stage, return may also be a challenge. And if we assist migrants moving from difficult places to places where they can have good life, we can equally assist them returning to where they think their lives can be better. Now, for example, we're talking about undocumented migrants, and we've seen across the years how life can be difficult for a lot of undocumented migrants. As Anne said at the beginning, it's not their fault that they become undocumented, but sometimes it comes that they become undocumented and they have a very precarious life. And in that occasion, most of the people don't know what to do. They don't know what option to take. So we are there to support them, to run different services, including psychological support, virtual counseling, put them in contact with the country of origin to explore possibility in the country of origin. And at the end, if they think that the best option for them is to return to the country of origin, where they can start life again, we can assist them to return in a very humane and dignified way, so that we can, and we do that by providing financial assistance as well, including when they reach the country of origin, to make sure that they don't start life from scratch, that they have something that they can start life with, and also with the support of IOM in the mission of origin, assist them to start life. And that gives them an opportunity to migrate again in the future. So we believe that the scope and the prospect of migration cannot be stopped because somebody has been undocumented in the country of migration, or somebody was not successful with the asylum international protection application. The person should be given the opportunity to migrate again in the future if opportunity is there. So the principle is the voluntary return. It's voluntary, as he said. It's well informed. It must be well informed. It's also cost effective compared to deportation, because the state may spend a lot of money when deporting people, and it's quite sustainable because, as I said at the beginning, the human integrity it's well kept when people migrate or return to the country of origin, and it's done in conjunctions with the returnees' timetables. So we do not really force people, say, well, it's time for you now to leave. Whenever people think that, well, this is the time for me to leave, even after applying for voluntary return, if they want to leave, not immediately in a month time or a few weeks time, it's up to them. We will follow whatever they want. Even at the end of the process, at the airport, if they change their mind, they say, well, I don't want to return anymore, we'll just stop the process there, because it must be a voluntary return. It's not a forced return. And it's done also by the most appropriate route, because we want to minimize any risk where the people returning may face again different hard challenges while returning to the country of origin. So we make sure that even if they're transiting in countries, our colleagues from those countries are there to support them in the process of moving from one flight to another. Now, who can avail for this service? Very quickly, the service is not for everybody, unfortunately. EU people are not, EU citizens are not eligible for this project. I know, unfortunately, we cannot assist everybody. So people from East European countries for sometimes I meet with a lot of them. They can be homeless. There are other services support them. So this service for IOM, it's only eligible for people who come for international protection, so international protection seekers. Irregular migrants, in particular, those who are the most vulnerable, they may have become kind of destitute, homeless, sick. They are sick. They don't have any support anymore, so they may be eligible for the service. Victims of trafficking, no matter the country they are coming from, even if they are EU citizens. As far as somebody is a victim of trafficking, that person will be eligible for voluntary return. And also all the unaccompanied minors are eligible for the service.
Okay, Agida.
Yes, I'm going to finish very quickly here. So the voluntary return for us, I said at the beginning, it's more cost effective, it's more dignified and not forced return, allow migrants to prepare themselves, assisted return, provide safeguards for vulnerable migrants. The procedure is once people are referred to us, we're going to do all the assessment. The person will be supported with further information, and the application will be sent to the Department of Justice to approve, because if people who have issues with justice, like it can be criminal cases, they may not be allowed to return unless they feel the case is closed. So once the approval is given by the Department of Justice, we can then book the flight according to the timetable of the applicant, and then we'll assist the person when the person post-arrival. So there will be money given, not directly cash, to the returnee, to the beneficiary. Money will be sent to the mission of origin. And once the person arrives in the country of origin, the person will contact the mission in the country of origin, and they will ask the person what he or she wants to do. Money is not given cash. So we support the person, because that's how we say that it's quite sustainable. We support the person to set up a business or to access a training that can allow him or allow her to access employment. And there will be kind of psychological support provided, and the person will be followed up maybe for a year or two until the person is stable. So that's the kind of broad support that we provide to people coming to seek our services in terms of returning to their country. Thanks very much, and I'm open to any questions. Thank you. Thanks, Alison.
Thank you very much, Agida, and sorry for having to kind of hurry you up at the very end. I was really enjoying listening to the work that you do, and yeah, it's really interesting, and I will have questions for you later on it, but we will have to just continue on for the moment. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
And I'm going to just keep moving and invite our next speaker to join us. So our next speaker is Catherine Cosgrave, and Catherine is from the Immigrant Council of Ireland. She is a specialised migration or human rights lawyer and is the managing solicitor of the Immigration Council of Ireland Independent Law Centre. She has authored several leading publications relating to family and child migration, trafficking and citizenship. In addition to legal practice, she has worked as a legal trainer and consultant and lecturer at the University of Limerick and Dublin Institute of Technology. She is the EUDO Ireland country expert on citizenship, and she sits on the advisory committee of the European Network on Statelessness. She is also the Fundamental Rights Agency Network Ireland expert on migration and a member of the National Advisory Committee on Children and Young People. So Catherine, we're delighted to have you with us this morning, and I will hand over to you now. And Catherine, you're on mute.
Good morning, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great, good morning everybody, and thank you very much to everybody for participating this morning, but especially for the invitation to address you all as part of the panel. I plan on just keeping my intervention, for want of a better description, quite short. For those of you who are not familiar with the work of the organisation, I wanted to firstly do a very brief overview of the Immigrant Council of Ireland itself, and then particularly given the topical relevance of it, focus a little bit on the services that we provide to undocumented migrants and a little bit of information on the forthcoming regularisation scheme. So just by way of brief introduction, Sorry, my slides don't appear to be moving. We are an organisation, we're a non-governmental organisation and charity established in 2001 in response to the emerging needs of the migrant population as they were identified at that time. The intention was to provide mainstream services to the immigrant population that were not asylum seekers and refugees, not because of any political lack of interest by the organisation in asylum seekers and refugees, but because at that time there were already services identified to be available, whether that was through the Civil Legal Aid Board for legal services or through the Irish Refugee Council as the national body supporting refugees and asylum seekers. In particular, what was identified at that time was a gap in terms of the lack of access, particularly to legal supports for the migrant population, for those who were living in Ireland, who had come for employment purposes or for study purposes or to join family, for example. There was a lack of access to services in that regard, whether it was through mainstream private practice, whether it was through the Legal Aid Board or through other service providers. So really the Immigrant Council was set up and always had a view to providing services of a legal nature to the migrant population. But it was envisaged that we, of course, as a small organisation, wouldn't be able to provide services to all migrants ourselves, but rather that we would develop a strategy to enhance access to services more generally. And we did that through a range of different ways, including through different activities. So we, for example, provide training to the frontline staff of all of the Citizens Information Centres nationally through the CIB, so that people may have access within their community in the same way they would if attending a CIC for information regarding how to get a PPS number, social welfare entitlements, that they can get basic information regarding immigration related applications, right through from the very beginning of a process where somebody may have a family member, for example, outside of the state and wishes to apply for a visa for them to join them in Ireland, right through to arrival in Ireland, registration, changes of status, and ultimately access to citizenship, for example. We also run our own information helpline that is available to any member of the public, whether that's a migrant or whether it's an Irish citizen or another service provider, for example, a social worker, a doctor, a teacher who has a query regarding immigration status and is looking for some guidance. And so we deliver that helpline 4 mornings a week and respond to about 5,000 queries a year through the helpline. From the helpline, we also make referrals then into the organisation's law centre. So we are a recognised law centre, which is a little bit unusual across the charitable sector, but we are one of a small number of organisations that is recognised by the Law Society of Ireland with capacity to employ solicitors to deliver full legal services to foreign nationals. And there are regulations underpinning the operation of independent law centres, a condition of which is that we do not charge services for our services. However, I do need to obviously underscore the fact that we remain a small organisation and our capacity to provide a legal service is very much dependent on our ability to actually provide the level of service to a person that we wish to be able to provide to them to ensure that it's an appropriate service that is being provided. We're not part of the civil legal aid structure, for example, and we're not obligated to provide our services unless we feel that we have capacity to do so properly. So I'll come back to those services in just a moment. In addition to the helpline and the law centre, we also engage in other activities across the wider organisation, primarily media and communications, as well as advocacy and law reform. So we would routinely be engaged in different forums, making submissions, perhaps to, for example, Oireachtas committees on proposed law reform and making suggested recommendations in respect of draft legislation. We also engage in education and training in a number of different forums. From the point of view of the Law Centre, for example, we are involved in the delivery of training for the Law Society as part of its diploma in immigration law, but also we are involved in delivery of our own training sessions, for example, to the staff of the Citizens Information Centres. But there's a broad programme of training on offer across different sections of the organisation. We have a large focus on anti-trafficking within the organisation as well, and then also on integration, and the current priorities of our integration team relate to political participation of migrants, the delivery of leadership programs and diversity training, and then also the delivery of anti-racism support services to migrants who wish to report matters and get support in dealing with their liaison with Bogardus, for example, or local authorities providing housing. In terms of our information line, it's open 4 mornings a week. The hours of opening are there. It's also open on Tuesday evenings because we're conscious of the fact that not everybody can step outside of work during 10 to 1. And we would obviously love if we could broaden our services, but it is subject to available funding and our capacity to resource it appropriately. We have a separate dedicated line for the staff of Citizens Information Services to also contact us daily, Monday to Friday, between 9 to 5. And sorry, I just skipped over there somehow. And it's from our helpline that individuals may be referred into the Law Centre for more support in complex cases. So somebody cannot contact the organisation and demand an appointment with the solicitor, for example. We don't have capacity to offer that. So it's typically where cases have been screened through the helpline and it is identified that the case is particularly complex and that the person would likely struggle to access a mainstream legal service. We also have core priority areas of focus. So within the Law Centre, we typically take on cases that relate to children, in particular unaccompanied refugee children who may be applying for family reunification, for example. We also have a focus on gender-based violence cases, specifically domestic violence and human trafficking, across all forms of human trafficking, but the predominant referral would be in the context of sexual exploitation, and then also undocumented migrants who are seeking assistance to regularize their status. I suppose just to clarify, we don't only work on those cases, so we work on issues that are broadly related to the entirety of the immigration system, matters from pre-entry right through to post-deportation and forced removal from the state, where somebody may be applying to revoke a deportation order, for example. But again, just to highlight that obviously we don't have capacity to take every case. So what we're really seeking to do is to identify those cases where there's either been an identified breach of rights where somebody needs to seek a remedy, or where they have, for example, an issue in their case that we can identify as relatively systemic, and that if we're able to get traction on that particular case, we may have greater success in seeking kind of a remedy for a broader cohort of individuals who similarly affected by the issue. And then, as I say, we focus on priority areas where particularly vulnerable individuals, it may not be an especially strategic case, and what have you. It may not be that there has yet been a breach of rights in terms of a decision that has been taken, but that the individual remains part of a cohort that can be identified to be specifically vulnerable, and therefore we make the services available to them. I'm happy to take questions on it later if anybody would like to ask anything. Then just, I suppose, a quick note on the top queries presenting into the service in our helpline. They're probably common to many, especially those other service providers who are here. I can see Richard there, who I liaise with very regularly in our work. And typically people presenting to our services are looking for information on access to either changing their resident status or gaining access to secure resident status because of the difficulties of maintaining a residence permission and keeping it in date at all times. Also then a huge number of queries relating to citizenship, whether that's access to citizenship at birth for children who are born in Ireland or by their adult parents or siblings who are seeking naturalisation, having been resident in Ireland for some time. And then persistently every year since 2001, a top query relates to what I would broadly describe as family life, but people seeking family reunification across all different categories of migrants, whether they're international protection grantees, Irish citizens, EU or British citizens, and then other non-EEA residents. I suppose just as well to underscore the topical and timely nature of things, we would currently, for example, be receiving a huge amount of queries relating to Afghans or family members who have Afghan family members overseas and how to bring them to Ireland safely. And then specifically, just because of the topic, again, working with undocumented migrants, I suppose the first thing really is just a comment into what do we consider to be an If you would be aware, there's a statutory obligation imposed on all non-EEA foreign nationals to maintain a lawful residence permission once they are living in Ireland. And if they don't hold a residence permission, then they are, I suppose, an undocumented migrant as soon as they don't have a valid IRP card. I typically draw a distinction between those who, though maybe on the face of it, undocumented because their card has relatively recently lapsed or they're awaiting a decision from the Department of Justice. And it's not that I don't want to signify that there's any lack of cause for concern. For those individuals, clearly there can be acute issues faced for them. For example, employers saying, you need to produce your updated card, don't come into work until you have your new card. But typically they are an undocumented migrant who's likely to resolve their situation and relatively quickly in many instances. So when I'm referring to undocumented migrants, I'm typically referring to undocumented migrants who are long-term undocumented and don't currently have an application pending, or may have an application pending, but it's from a position of like severe precarity where they have been undocumented and they've made an application to either regularize their status, having been undocumented for a long period of time and not having a window really under the mainstream immigration system to get a positive outcome. So like they're within the population of undocumented, I suppose there's a spectrum of being undocumented, and our focus often is very much on those who are long-term undocumented and don't have an easy solution to regularizing their situation. At the very beginning, I suppose it was noted that many people become undocumented through no fault of their own. That would be matched in our services as well. Many people come to Ireland lawfully and hold a residence permission at the outset, and then fall out of status due to difficulties in renewing employment permits or renewing residence permission, or following relationship breakdown and the lack of clarity for them regarding how to deal with their situation. But often people will present into our services following either a refusal to renew their residence status or to grant a change of status, or where there's proposed revocation of status. And I'd like to just kind of note the lack of kind of statutory framework there for dealing with those applications. That Irish immigration legislation is only very clear really on the obligation to hold the permit and the minister's power to grant a permit, but actually there's a lack of clarity regarding a lot of what happens within the Irish immigration system in terms of the power of the minister to revoke permissions or to grant a change of status generally.
Right, Catherine, I'm going to have, sorry, apologies for interrupting you. We're just pushing on a little bit in time. So if you don't mind finishing up, and we can take some more questions, which I'm sure people will undoubtedly have for you later on.
No problem. So just flicking to the last slide, this is where I was going to conclude. There is a proposed regularization scheme for the numbers of people who are undocumented at the moment. We expect that there will be huge demand for the regularization scheme. I don't have a breakdown by county of our own figures, but we noted in our own submission to the department earlier this year that 5.5% of our service users in the 18 months prior to that submission being made were undocumented, in the sense of being long-term undocumented, and it didn't account for example, additional family members that may have been part of the overall query. It was just the specific individual who was contacting the service. So we expect that there will be huge demand for the regularisation scheme when it is finally announced. There's currently very limited information available on who will qualify for the scheme, other than it will be for those who are long-term undocumented and perhaps have up to 4 years undocumented, or 3 years if they are with children. And we know that if granted, it's likely to grant a right to work in Ireland, but the terms and conditions of the residence permit are not yet known. So we don't know, for example, if successful applicants will be granted a stamp 4 residence permission and all that provides. And we also do know that it is likely to be a residence stamp that provides reckonable residence for future citizenship applications. So I'll wrap up there. Apologies for speaking over time, and thanks again. I'm happy to take questions.
Catherine, thank you very much for that, and apologies for having to interrupt you, because you know, it's really important information that you're providing there, and I'm sure that maybe people might have questions for you in the Q&A session at the end. So Catherine, thank you very much for that. Okay, so our next speaker then is Dr. Brendan O'Keefe, and Dr. Brendan O'Keefe is going to speak to us this morning about the Waterford Migrant Integration Strategy. So Brendan, if you are there. Yes, very welcome, Brendan. I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you very much, Alison, and thank you to Waterford Integration Services for the invitation and the opportunity to be with you here this morning. I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to talk to you specifically about the Waterford Integration Strategy. I had the pleasure of working with John Toohey, with Emma Smith, and with in the City and County Council, with Anne Nolan and the other members of the steering group in compiling the Waterford Integration Strategy a few years ago. The strategy is currently being implemented by the Council and by the various partners at the moment. We talked about integration when we were devising the strategy as a three-way process. It's focused on the migrant, it's responding to the needs of migrant communities, and it places particular responsibilities on what we call the host society or the host community, in this case, Waterford. So in the course of our work, we undertook consultations with the migrant communities, and we also undertook research among the host community, the host society in Waterford. And already in the presentations this morning, we've heard people talk about the importance of data, the importance of evidence-based decision-making, and by any measure, any objective measure, the Waterford Integration Strategy is very strongly evidence-based and very data-driven. The third leg of the stool here, if you like, of the process of integration involves the country of origin. And in compiling the Waterford Integration Strategy, we reached out to the sending countries of migrants, if you like. We talked to ambassadors, we talked to cultural representatives, we engaged with the agencies and so on. However, in the case of the undocumented, you're missing that element, you're missing that particular set of supports, that set of networks that are really important in supporting integration. So integration requires a particular extra push when it comes to an extra supports, when it comes to those who are, as Anne said at the outset, undocumented, clearly by no fault of their own. The countries of origin have an important role to play in integration, and this is covered fairly extensively in the literature and indeed in the European documentation going back to 2011. They prepare the migrants before their departure. They support the migrants while they're in the European Union, in theory, and they prepare the migrants temporary or definitive return, and we've already heard about that as well this morning. But where this is missing, in the case of the undocumented, obviously, then it places extra responsibilities on the host society, and to date, those have mainly been on the NGOs rather than the statutory sector. So there's a requirement for some recalibration, some rebalancing of the responsibilities in the Irish context. Earlier this year, I was involved in co-facilitation of consultation workshops to inform Ireland's action plan against racism. And you see there on the screen the 4 themes under which the consultation process was organised. And of course, to access any one of those, like justice, employment, education, participation in civic society, having your documents, having your papers is an assumed prerequisite. So when it comes to the undocumented, you have extra sets of challenges. And in the consultation document that the department produced, they made 2 statements. Obviously, the first one there, which we have to acknowledge, the reality of racism in Ireland and the need for a comprehensive and effective national action plan to tackle it. And they also stated that having good equality data is important in tackling racism. And that's why the Waterford strategy is very strong on the data side of things. I'm also highlighting here the Carlow Migrant Integration and Intercultural Strategy as another exemplar of something in the Southeast region that's data-driven and acknowledges the differences, the diversity, the richness within the migrant populations. And just to show you some of the statistics from Waterford there, you can see, if you look at the top left of the screen, 15,160 non-Irish nationals recorded in the census. But of those, almost 12% have not stated their nationality. Now, when you look at any other variables in the census, obviously there will be some responses where there's a volume of not stated persons. That's usually in the order of 2 to 3%. So we're looking here at a multiple of 4 to 6 times a data deficit in terms of nationality among non-Irish nationals. And then we have 33 persons with no nationality, most of whom actually are children. And some children have ended up in legal limbos because of the 2004 amendment to the Irish Constitution, which decoupled citizenship from place of birth. And obviously that clearly needs to be repealed. Then you see the 2 maps there of Waterford City and County, the county on the left-hand side, the areas of, in the darker shades of blue, have higher proportions of non-Irish nationals in the population, and then the same in the city. And it's interesting in the city that some of the areas that were most in need of urban renewal and regeneration are areas in which you find the migrant populations, and indeed migrants are playing an active role in the rejuvenation of particular neighbourhoods. But of course, up to now, there has been a clustering of migrant populations in areas of deprivation. And that too needs to be acknowledged. In the Waterford Integration Strategy, and indeed in Carlow as well, we involve the host community, the Irish communities, in measuring their attitudes towards the various nationalities and ethnicities. And we use what's called the Bogardus scale of social distance. And of course, the words social distance have taken on a completely new meaning in Ireland over the last 2 years. So you can see on the right-hand side there, the methodology, the various rankings that people were asked, and we presented them with a list of various nationalities and ethnicities, and people responded according to the indicators that are there on the right-hand side. And on the left-hand side, you see the results. So we have at the top Spaniards, French, Scots, Swedes, other Western European nationalities to whom Irish people feel an affinity. There is a low level of social distance. But at the bottom of the screen, you have those to whom Irish people perceive a higher level of social distance. And it's interesting that those towards the bottom of the list include Palestinians and Roma, who can be described as stateless people or people without a state, or in the case of the Palestinians, people whose state was taken from them, Roma, who are across a number of states, predominantly Romania, but also Hungary, the former Yugoslav republics. And in those countries, they have experienced widespread and systemic discrimination, not just from the societies, but indeed from governments as well. So it's interesting that that discrimination against those people who are most likely to be undocumented in the sending country, they're experiencing the same levels of social distancing in Irish society as well. So there is a particular set of issues there around being undocumented. Of course, to come around some of these issues, we find there's scope for integration in what you might call the soft spaces of civic engagement, such as being members of community and voluntary organizations. But you can see there 58% of the migrants we surveyed in Waterford were not members. And then you can see higher figures there in terms of their non-engagement in the electoral process. So clearly there's a scope for a lot of work to be done in both the formal and informal contexts in promoting greater civic engagement generally among the migrant populations. And just to finish up here then, to broaden out the data piece, just to highlight for you the Santa Marta project that Mary Immaculate College in Limerick, where I've worked, has undertaken research on trafficking into Ireland and has highlighted the underreporting of trafficking. And again, that's a particular issue for the undocumented. And here you can see the means of trafficking among those who are known, probable and possible victims of trafficking into Ireland. And there you can see the deception, threats, but, and the falsehoods that were perpetrated to entice people into the country, and then the exploitation of the undocumented when they're in the country. We also find that this is an issue in the fishing industry in particular, and that is particularly relevant in Waterford, being a coastal community. And the exploitation of the undocumented in the fishing industry has been highlighted in a recent Maynooth University report that I think was published last week. So just to conclude, in terms of the integration strategies and the undocumented, we see from the Waterford example that when the strategy was being formulated, it was very strongly evidence-based. There's a need to continue this approach, to keep a watching brief on qualitative and quantitative data, to keep up the effort in that respect, because new issues are coming to the fore all the time. The process was inclusive, it was consultative, indeed it was intensive. And now that we're in the implementation phase, it's important to mainstream that, to embed consultations, make them systematic. The need for integration, linking integration into wider strategies at council and community level. And as other speakers have said already this morning, the need for ongoing information, vigilance, communication to the wider host society, and then informing policies, monitoring, evaluating the integration strategies so that the lessons from them are feeding into policy at national, EU level and beyond.
Thank you very much, Brendan, for that excellent presentation. And it's great to see such an evidence-based and data-informed approach to developing a strategy. And that's something that maybe that us here in WIT might be able to help people with going forward, but very impressive. So thank you very much for that.
Sure.
Okay, our final speaker before we have a break, and maybe we can look at there's a couple of questions as well then, is Don Toohey, and we're delighted that Don is joining us this morning. Don is from Waterford City and County Council. He is the Chief Officer with Waterford Local Community Development Committee and has been since 2016. And he is Senior Executive Officer with Waterford City and County Council with responsibility for community and sport. And he is a graduate of UCC and the Institute of Public Administration. So Don, you're very welcome, and I will hand over to you.
Thanks very much. Just thanks for the invitation to be part of the panel here today. Appreciate that. Just a note, first of all, Michael Walsh, who's the Waterford Council Chief Executive, sends his apologies and sends his best wishes for the success of today's event. Waterford City and County Council has been conscious of its responsibilities to welcome and integrate those who come from other countries and have made Waterford their home. You've all heard what Brendan said there about the strategy. One thing which is noted by Brendan and as part of that strategy preparation, that among migrants, the most frequently used words to describe Waterford are friendly, peace, quiet, home, beauty, and welcome. So that adds to the comment that Anne made earlier about Waterford being the best place in the country to live. So I think a lot of positives to build on from there. In 2018, the Council set up the Waterford Migrant Integration Forum. The intention being to build a fully inclusive, integrated, just society in Waterford for the benefit of all residents and future generations. Since then, I'm happy to state the 4 members have served on important council committees like the Joint Policing Committee, Strategic Policy Committees, and the LCDC Local Community Development Committee itself. So this is ensuring that the voice of the migrant is being heard in Waterford. I want to acknowledge the work and commitment of the Waterford Migrant Integration Forum members and wish them continued success. And hopefully some of them are tuning into this webinar this morning. I suppose just to note as well that in 2018, the council provided housing for 100 Syrian refugees, which was Waterford's full allocation under the Irish Refugee Protection Programme. Again, going back to the strategy for a second, in 2019, the council, through the LCDC, commissioned Brown Dawn to work with the LCDC subcommittee on migrant integration to develop the Waterford Migrant Integration Strategy 21 to 24. The intention behind the strategy was to set out objectives and actions to build a tolerant, inclusive and integrated society for those coming into our city and county. Again, just to touch on the strategy again, it's hugely ambitious in its approach and vision. There's 43 key recommendations relating to areas like education, lifelong learning, employment, pathways to work, health, social inclusion, sport. And the core principles that are set out in this strategy advocate a partnership approach between government and non-governmental organisations, the creation of stronger links between integration policy and wider social inclusion measures, we'll come back to that in a second, and the commitment to effective local delivery mechanisms that align services to migrants with those for Indigenous communities. The strategy itself was fully endorsed by the Plenary Council at a special meeting which the Council held in July 2020. The LCDC multi-agency subcommittee, which is working on migrant integration, is continuing to work on advancing the actions and recommendations as set out in the strategy. We are very conscious, however, that this will only happen if all those agencies work together. And that's, I suppose, that's a key challenge going forward and has been, but I must say that the commitment of organisations, state and non-state, has been excellent so far. We should thank the various organisations for that input. I'm happy to note the recent appointment of Mark Mabanda, who I know is speaking in a second, to support the implementation of the strategy. And I wish to acknowledge with thanks the work of Anne Nolan and the board of WIS for making this initiative happen. The council has a very strong working relationship with WIS, with whom we work to try and put in place specific supports for those with more complex needs, such as the undocumented. I also wish to thank Waterford Area Partnership and the Social Inclusion Community Activation Programme, SICAP, for financially supporting the support worker position in conjunction with the council. The LCDC has contracted Waterford Area Partnership to implement SICAP locally. This is a major social inclusion initiative. Through SICAP, substantial effort has gone into supporting migrant support groups like the Migrant Forum and in training individuals to prepare them for work. I wish to commend and thank Waterford Area Partnership for putting in place a support worker for the Migrant Forum for 6 months to help the forum to develop. It's heartening to note that the support worker is himself from the migrant community. There are many other ways in which the council has endeavoured to support migrants in Waterford, including the annual Africa Day celebrations, the work done by our library service, which is very much appreciated by those arriving into our county, as evidenced by the strategy, the Yellow Flag programme in schools, voter mobilisation workshops through the ICI, and various other initiatives. We in the council are conscious that much has been done, but more has to be done to support migrants coming to our city and county. Implementation of the strategy over the coming years will go a long way towards achieving that goal. Go raibh maith agaibh.
Thank you very much, Don, for that.
Thanks,
Thank you. So look, that brings us up to I suppose the first half of the programme. There is a time, we've got a 5-minute time scheduled for a break. Just before we do that, there's a couple of comments and questions that we might just have a quick look at. So Catherine has commented, Catherine Cosgrave, around the census figures and that those were identified as having no nationality. And she just said this is something that she would love to discuss more. And there's lots of concerns in relation to children identity documents not been taken up from birth. So Catherine, maybe that's something that we might come back to in our discussions later on, because I think that's a very important point. And also in the Q&A, we have a question, I think this was for Catherine, that was in relation to the majority of undocumented migrants are in hiding, and the person's asked if would you advise they go back into the system because of the upcoming law for regularisation. So Catherine, I don't know if you want to comment on that later or if you want to comment on it.
I can comment quickly now. It's very difficult to give a broad answer to a question like when I think many people who are undocumented, their individual circumstances are very different. So I would never just say in a public forum, yes, everybody should come forward. I think that first of all, given how soon the undocumented scheme is likely to be made public in terms of the full criteria, and the fact that there will be a 6-month window most likely for putting in applications, that it's wise for people to perhaps at least if they want to raise their head above the parapet, to reach out to migrant support organisations that deliver their services free of charge and confidentially. So it's not just the Immigrant Council of Ireland, for example, that does that. They could reach out to Crosscare, they could reach out to Waterford Integration Network, they could reach out to whoever to get a referral made to discuss their own particular circumstances, because they may not be eligible under the scheme based on either what their circumstances are or the length of time that they have been undocumented, or it may come to pass that if they do make themselves known, that actually there's an existing solution for them under the wider immigration situation that was unknown to them, whether that's through domestic violence concessions, whether it's under other schemes to do with relationship status with an Irish national, for example, to do with parentage of children. There's a whole load of things there, and it can be very complex and difficult for people to actually understand what might be best suited to them and not just place their eggs in a possible regularisation scheme that may not apply to them. So, and yes, I'd say kind of come forward, but discreetly to an organisation that is there to provide a service to you free and confidentially, and without actually having to make yourself known to the state authorities if you're concerned about doing that. So a little bit of caution, but certainly I'd say do engage with somebody who's there to help.
I would just add to that, Alison, by saying that we have supported undocumented persons in the past, and we actually had intended to do this session in 2020, long before the regularisation scheme came on board. You know, like I said, we have assisted people, you know, that have been kind of in very tricky employment situations that has placed them at risk. Obviously, people are very reluctant to come forward. They don't know who is their enemy, who is their ally. I remember in Watford there, people initially would have been scared of somebody coming along in a car park attendant, anybody in a uniform, so we're mindful of those type of things as well. But we are here, we're here all the time. It's not just for the regularisation scheme. We do assist, as Catherine has mentioned, there's plenty of other avenues that we have applied under before, and we are kind of known for that. But the other thing that there's very little mention about is young people that arrive here unaccompanied and on their own, completely on their own. So for whatever reason, they lose people along the way. We Ajida mentioned earlier on about people crossing the Mediterranean. Unfortunately, there's still people dying in the Mediterranean every day, but it doesn't even make the news anymore. So we are here and we're here all the time, and it's about building up relationships of trust as well, and respecting that and maintaining, people's dignity in this process as well. So yes, we are here and we are available. If people realise that they're not eligible under the regularisation scheme, we're here to look at other opportunities and options for them, and we're very happy to link in with the Immigrant Council of Ireland, Crosscare, and also the Migrant, other agencies that are there as well, the Migrant Rights Centre, for example, So yes, we are here for that, and we hope that that kind of answers that question in a particular way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Anne. So I suppose that's a good it's a good point of contact to have, and you know, you can point people in the direction of the relevant supports and the other networks that might be useful as well. So okay, look, we're going to take a quick break. If we break maybe until 10 past 12, and we'll come back and we'll continue then with our speakers, and we'll have a little bit more time at the end for some additional questions and answers. So we'll take a break, and I'll see you all back at 10 minutes past 12. Okay, all welcome back. Hopefully everybody got a couple of minutes to grab a coffee and take a quick break. And look, we'll move on with the second part of the programme for today. So I'm delighted then to welcome our next speaker, and our next speaker is Richard King, and Richard is joining us from Crosscare. So Richard, I see you there, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you. I'll hand over to you now.
Great, thanks so much, Alison. Good, just the afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks a million to the previous speakers who were really interested in some great inputs. I took a bit of a punt that a lot of the issues will be covered prior to me coming on, and I was right, so I'm delighted. I don't need to repeat loads of things that have been said. So let me share screens with you for a minute, just have a couple of slides to go through. Just to give everyone a sense of who we are, we're mainly based in Dublin, and we're a project of Crosscare, the social support agency of the Dublin Archdiocese. And I'm from Crosscare Migrant Project, but I work really closely with two other projects, and together we comprise our information and advocacy services. So we have Crosscare Housing and Welfare Information and Crosscare Refugee Service. We're based in Dublin City Centre. We've been there for many, many years. Actually, the organisation is over 80 years old. We've been working with migrant communities in Dublin since the late 90s, actually. So in the Migrant Project, what we do is we're primarily information advocacy service to start with, and we support migrants living in Ireland. And we also work with Irish immigrants who are living abroad and returning to Ireland. And I'm specifically mentioning that because there are parallels with the Irish undocumented communities across the world. And we're probably the only organisation who has a kind of remit to work with both in a very small way as well. And there's only 6 of us in the project. But it is really important just to reference it, because we would do a lot of work with people coming back to Ireland and people who are leaving situations of being undocumented. And I think from our practical experience, like, the issues are just so similar. And at the heart of it, you just have people who want a bit of security and to get by and to progress and to support their families. And being undocumented is just such a massive barrier to that in so many ways. The work we do then is information, it's advocacy and referral work. And I mention referrals too, because within Dublin, there are a lot of support services. So a lot of agencies have kind of taken on niche areas of work, whereas I know outside of Dublin, probably any group working with migrants tends to have to take on lots of things. We're in the lucky position of being able to focus in on a smaller bunch of stuff. So my colleagues in our Housing Welfare Project look after housing and social welfare stuff, and the refugee service, they'd look at asylum and related issues. And then for us, we get to look at just around the migration system. So like Catherine said, the type of supports we might provide will be around how to engage with the immigration system, for people whose circumstances are changing or who want to get a more secure permission. This is the sort of thing we provide support with. And of course, the undocumented communities come into that as well. We also do training and information support for other organizations, and we link a lot with services, frontline services. So places like TUSLA, aftercare, social workers, medical social workers, homeless services, domestic violence, refuges. And our role within that is to provide the immigration side, the added value, because always with someone from outside the EU, there is there's this immigration barrier, whether they're in status or out of status, that impacts on how they can access other services. Sometimes it's simple and sometimes it's complicated. When we're looking at Dublin in particular, I guess is where we would sorry, I should really make this a little bit bigger as well. When we're looking at Dublin, we would be looking at a particular set of issues. And if I could just move my screen, this is one of these really frustrating things with Zoom, where it just decides to do really annoying things. Like I said, the issues are the same for everyone. Housing and accommodation in Dublin, they're very high costs and little availability. And we know that the undocumented communities in Dublin are living, many of them, in very substandard accommodation. And it's very problematic. It was very problematic through the COVID pandemic. We're not quite out of there yet, but certainly in the initial times it was highlighted by the HSE and public health teams that there was a big concern among the undocumented communities with very high occupancy rates in small accommodation. Access to housing supports is very limited as well, maybe emergency shelter, but engaging with authorities, of course, is problematic sometimes, either in practice or perceptually for people who are undocumented. Healthcare, another one. Obviously, emergency and primary healthcare are available, but you might have to pay for them, and there's certainly potential for high costs. And we know as well that there are people living with chronic and long-term illnesses who are not getting the supports and the health supports that they need to get. And then around employment, I mean, very well recognized that there are issues of exploitation in unemployment for people who are undocumented. COVID-19 closures were very problematic. One of the great things about the COVID PUP was that people could access it, and I hope everyone who needed to did, but that is not necessarily going to follow on, and as that closes down, mainstream social welfare supports are not going to be available. And then in terms of how we might support these things, Catherine talked about information advice about immigration options. This is really important because the points were made both by Anne and Catherine that like people who are undocumented might be temporarily so, they might be changing status, they might be long-term undocumented, they may have entered the country with nothing and stayed in that situation. They may have entered as a spouse or a family member and there is a breakdown of relationships. So one of the things that we offer is that confidential conversation or chat to assess a person's situation and to see the way forward. The question earlier about should people engage the authorities, when the undocumented scheme comes up, we hope there's very clear criteria. There should be, in which case, if you meet the criteria, then it's an option for you. But there may be other routes, and certainly a consultation with us or with someone else confidentially and free is a really, really good idea because it might identify routes forward. Within Dublin as well, there are a lot of supports that exist outside of the mainstream statutory supports. There are food centres for free food and essential items. There's free primary healthcare services for GPs, dentists and nurses and vaccinations. There's local supports and organizations for social and educational opportunities. We work with the Chinese community directly. We've a number of great long-term volunteer interpreters. We also work with Somali and Arabic volunteer interpreters. And I know when I was talking to Anne prior to this that we were talking about like the undocumented communities around the country, and that in Waterford there's, you know, quite a large representation from the Brazilian community, as there is in other places around Ireland, but also the spread is enormous. The spread is across communities. You can't even pick out a single one. There are people who've been very long-term undocumented within the Chinese community, maybe came on work permits or study visas back in 2000, 2001, 2002. You're talking about 20 plus years. There are people, family units where one person is documented and one is undocumented, and it's quite complex. And I suppose one of the things that we always see as being so important is that where there are needs and where people are in that situation, the immigration permission might be a barrier to accessing services and supports. We have to acknowledge that there might also be ways around those barriers, maybe short-term, maybe long-term. They may or may not involve engaging with immigration. But going back to that question of being engaged with the Department of Justice, one of the things that we often see is that statutory services like homeless and social welfare and other ones, when they don't see a permission or a documentation, balk at engaging. And that's not always, doesn't always have to be the case. I've worked with domestic violence cases where someone is undocumented, where the local social welfare office, the local council and local TUSL are all involved offering and providing services. And the ways into this is often through the NGOs and the community services and centres. So people really should reach out and engage. Now is the time when the new scheme comes out to see if there are great clear options to moving into the system. But even if not, there may be ways to get other supports and to get some advice and make a decision about where someone is going, like Ejide said earlier. I think there's no secret to successful integration being dependent on someone having the security to work, to live, to have their family. The undocumented scheme, when it comes out, is a great opportunity for that, and something that we would always massively support, because you know, living in the shadows is not giving people the chance to reach their full potential, and there's always living with that fear and with the lack of safety nets is detrimental to everyone, really. So I think where possible, the best route is almost always to try and move into the system, if that is a possibility. And we really hope that this new scheme will be wide-reaching and broad enough to draw all these people back in. And certainly, just on a practical note, we'll be looking very specifically at doing some work with Chinese communities, wherever they might be. As I said, they're all around the country, but we'll be running language-based information sessions and with the sports, the IOM as well, into the next few months, to try and reach out to as many people as possible during that period. I think I better leave it there, Alison, and let you move on to the next person. So any questions, please, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Richard, for that. I think we do have a couple of questions popping up in the chat. We might have a quick look at them now, and then we can move on. I'm just conscious that people are putting in questions, so it would be nice to come back to them on them. So I think there's a comment really from Jim there. He's saying, during the height of the pandemic and the COVID, Waterford Community Care Action Group found it hard to get grocery shopping and medical prescriptions to the direct provision centres. Once a call came in for help, volunteers would arrive in an address and would ask for the person. Others at the centre were reluctant to say it, and that was an issue. And you know, assuming again fear is a major factor here, and that the undocumented person or persons, you know, then were maybe not getting access to the shopping or the medical prescriptions or things that they might have needed. So thanks for that comment, Jim. There's another question here from an anonymous attendee. This is a question addressed to Catherine and Don. I was asking about where one parent is undocumented and the rest of the family is supported under the housing assistance payment. The undocumented parent is not allowed to stay with them due to the status, because there's a need to be registered with the housing waiting list, which demands a stamp. If the undocumented parent comes to stay with the family, then the HAP contract may be at risk of ending. And there's a question there, is there any alternative in that case? So I don't know if somebody would like to address that from the panel.
I'm happy just to mention it briefly. It's not my particular area, but it certainly is my colleagues. Yeah, this is an ongoing problem with regard to accommodation and housing and the criteria around having someone in the household. I mean, in this case, with the new undocumented scheme coming up, we would really hope that this person can get back into the system, and that will be absolutely the way in right now. I can't think of an immediate route to solve that one right now if someone is undocumented. But it's the sort of thing that they should be coming to talk to one of our organizations about, certainly in terms of the parents' position and status. Sorry, and maybe Don or someone else has a more expert opinion on specific things around HAP.
Something we need to check out for, and I suppose we would have no immediate answer on that one, Alison.
Okay. But again, the advice really it is to link it back, maybe back in with the services outside of this particular webinar here today, and to try to follow up on that.
I would add to that, Alison, to say that it's not unusual for us to come across examples like this, not just in relation to HAP, but in relation to other services as well. You know, so it's not unusual maybe for half the family members to be documented and one or two others not. So you know, Catherine has already, and other people have already spoken about the complexities of each individual situation. So we have to take everything that comes in on a case-by-case basis and try and work through it methodically then to say, well, if A doesn't work, can we try B, C, and D, or whatever? You know, it kind of is beyond us really to understand how one half of the family can be documented, you know, and other members not. So it's something kind of that we have to look at. Now, we don't want to be putting a system in place and that kind of precludes everybody, but it's something, yeah, that does warrant attention. And I suppose just while I have the opportunity here as well, a lot of this work additional work kind of falls back on the NGOs and other civil society organisations to deliver services on, but yet there is no identified kind of funding streams to deliver on these. And like Don would be aware of this as well, and Brendan as well, who spoke earlier on about Waterford Migrant Integration Strategy. Each area is expected to have an integration strategy now, but there is no kind of direction from the departments as to how that has to be managed and financed. We all want to see these strategies implemented, but how is that, you know, realistically supposed to be done? So that's another question that people kind of need to bear in mind as well, because I'm sure that a lot of the additional work around the regularisation scheme will also fall back on NGOs as the initial point of contact, you know, because that's where the relationship is. You know, the relationships of trust are so important in these issues, where people are living in fear kind of 98% of the time. So that's something that has to be looked at as well, that hasn't actually been mentioned at all yet today. So we'll wait and see from the rest of the speakers how that goes. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you all the panelists for the advice on that. There's one other question here for Catherine. Does your organisation provide services to asylum seekers who have been deemed inadmissible by the state to pursue their asylum process? And if so, how can they be referred? And that's to Catherine. So I don't know if she's here. Maybe she's just
Catherine might have disappeared. I would well, firstly, just say, just on that point, probably the Irish Refugee Council will be a good call to assess that in terms of whether there was a correct decision for it to be deemed inadmissible. And then outside of that, if it's engaging with other routes into the immigration system, then it will be one of the organisations like Immigrant Council or ours, the Migrant Rights Centre, NASC, Durrus. Yeah, there's a selection of them. So they could be options for people to contact.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thanks for that, Richard. Okay, we'll move on then to our next speaker. And our next speaker is Tulawani Akuman from the LTI Pathways to Employment Programme. So I see you're there, ready to go. And so I'll hand over to Tulawani.
Thank you very much, Dr. Allison. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. Thank you to all our panelists for the brilliant sharing of your thoughts, the perspectives on hidden migrants documented. And of course, a big thank you to Anne Nolan for our unwavering dedication to this cause. I am here in capacity as the Waterford Integration Services LTI, Local Training Initiative Coordinator. So what is really the LTI? It's a project-led and work experience-oriented program which takes place in local communities and are run by local groups. So it's designed primarily for people who are out of work or are experiencing difficulty in accessing the labour market or accessing further education. The courses are delivered in an Irish labour market needs-driven way. So what that means is that we try to ensure that what we're delivering allows people to be job ready. And of course, our courses are QQI accredited. So participants are encouraged to develop their existing skills. And if I could just say a little bit about those existing skills, right now we've started a group of participants that are from the country, they're highly skilled. We have a solicitor in the room. We have somebody who has qualifications in mechanical engineering. And the mere fact that we can recognize that in the LTI program is really significant for them in helping them to sometimes regain their self-esteem, because as you well know, when we go through this process as new communities, a lot of things are lost along the way, and that's part of that is self-esteem, self-confidence. So people are encouraged to develop their existing skills, and then they also are encouraged to learn new ones in a highly supportive environment underpinned by adult learning philosophy. And of course, we try to ensure that the training is tailored to meet the individual needs of the people. So it's highly interactive, it's adult learning driven, and I dare say the people that we have on right now are having a really good time. So the key goal of the project is to support participants to enter or re-enter, as the case may be, the labour market, or to start their own businesses, or to access further education. And this is a key part of what Waterford Integration Services does, because the support that is offered to new communities by our organization is really our commitment to increasing opportunities for access to education, access to training, access to employment, and access to social enterprises. I mean, we have people in the room even now that have ideas for social enterprises that are coming up in the course of our discussion in just a couple of weeks that we started. People are thinking of things that they probably never imagined they would think of if we hadn't started the program. So that is really exciting for us. So creating the opportunities to access education, to access training, to access employment is just one of the ways in which Waterford Integration Services support those undocumented within our new communities. And of course, this is, as I said earlier, this is really significant because even in the 2 weeks they started, we've seen people just blossom, really. And that is really testament to the importance of organizing this kind of training and support for people who are undocumented, because previously would have that kind of, would have this criterion that it's only those who are documented within the new communities that will access training. But it's really encouraging that we have that we've been allowed a leeway to get more people in, particularly those who are undocumented among people in new communities, because it is really significant to helping them see a way forward. And because I'm a migrant myself, I'm not part of the new community, and I've gone through this road myself, I understand firsthand what the experience of people are and how significant these interventions are. But as I thought about today, one of the key things that came to mind is how actually do we measure the success of LTI programs, not just WIS, not just Waterford Integration Services, but LTI program around the country. There's a lot of LTI programs taking place around the country in different areas. But if our key goal across the country is to support people within the new communities, whether documented or undocumented, to access labor market, and we, you know, it's something that we all know that generally people from new communities, they are the ones that suffer labor market exclusion the most. And of course, they then suffer from social economic underdevelopment, social economic exclusion. So if that is the goal of LTI programs, that we support people into employment, we support people into further education, how do we measure the successes? And that should really be data driven. So I suppose that is an area that we need to explore as communities that engage in LTI programs. How can we provide data to measure the impact of what we are doing within new communities, whether with the undocumented and the documented? So thanks very much. I think that was short, less than 10 minutes. I was wanting to make that less than 10 minutes. So thanks very much, Dr. Allison.
Thank you very much, Hello. I mean, you kept perfectly to the time, and it's also fantastic to hear and uplifting, I suppose, to hear of the great work that you're doing in the community, and that you can see that people are starting to blossom and develop from your work. So that is fantastic, and congratulations on that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a couple of speakers left, and then we have more. I know we've a couple of comments and questions in the chat, and we'll definitely take those at the end. I'm not forgetting about them. So our next speaker that we're going to move on to is Sinead Cummins, and Sinead is here and she's going to talk to us. She's from Work Matters in Europe Direct. So Sinead, yeah, she's starting to share the screen. Good, how are you? I don't say good morning, but it's good afternoon at this stage.
Good afternoon, all. Thank you for having me. I'm the Work Matters at the Library Coordinator for Waterford Libraries, and I've been in that role for the last 6 years. I've been in the library for 21 years. So I'm just going to talk briefly today about a couple of our services, because if I was to talk about library services, we'd be here till next week. While the presentation is waiting to share, I'll just talk about Work Matters briefly. It's a service that's been running in the libraries for the last 6 years, as I said, and it's aimed at job seekers, those looking to change careers, and anybody who's thinking of starting a new business. We would help people in the library with this by, for anyone job seeking, we provide access to CV, cover letter templates, practice aptitude tests, interview preparation. We also have access to online learning courses, ebooks, physical books in our libraries. Anyone who's thinking of changing career, we have lots of links to education resources that are available nationally and locally, and they're all up on our website as our useful links. We would have new business planning templates for anybody who's thinking of starting a business, and the same then lots of useful resources and links to national and local organisations that have resources that are helpful in that area. Then just on site in our libraries, we would have free Wi-Fi in all of our buildings. So that's big or small, there's free Wi-Fi for people to come in to use. We have meeting rooms in our larger libraries, public laptops there for anybody who needs access to a computer for whether they're typing up a CV, need to look up the IOM's website, any kind of details like that. We have those in all our library buildings. We have printing and copying and scanning facilities. These are the only things that we actually have a small charge for in the libraries. Study spaces or meeting spaces for people to meet up with. And then we have access to different new technologies as well. So for those maybe who are maybe thinking of starting their own business or have just started, over the coming months, we're going to be starting kind of a tech incubation space here in the Central Library. So for anybody who wants to move away from their kitchen table, but doesn't have the wherewithal yet to get out and rent their own premises, we're going to have a space that they can use here in the library for that. What I should have mentioned at the very start is library membership is free and open to all, so there's no barriers there for that. Some of our online resources, we have ebooks, e-audiobooks, magazines, e-newspapers, I should say, and they're all available on our website or as an app there. So they're BorrowBox, Libby, and Press Reader. Transparent Language is our free online language learning tool. There's courses there, over 100 different courses in different languages, and there's over 30 courses in English as a second language. So if anybody who wants to brush up on their English language skills, they can do that through their library for free. Universal Class is a free online general learning tool. There's courses there in everything from career guidance, interview skills, social media for small businesses, along with hundreds of others. The last one then is an e-business resource that we provide access to for free. It has all the company's registration of information in Ireland there. So anybody who's, again, thinking of starting a new business, you can go in there, search your competitors, see whether they're doing well or not, and see whether there's space in the market for you. Anyone who's going for an interview, they can look up the company they're interviewing with to find out a little bit more about them. And then just briefly, I shall talk about our Europe Direct service. This is one of 7 centres in Ireland, and along with 424 other centres across the European Union. They offer they're a free information and communication point for EU citizens, or all citizens, I suppose, of people living in Ireland, to communicate with the EU and disseminate information, timely and factual information on EU policies. We then would also do this by hosting events locally with partners to give citizens a voice in the EU kind of agenda, conversations on the future of Europe, European policies. And then we would, from those events and event information we get back in the branches, we would feedback that up to the European Commission then, so it's a two-way process. So that's kind of briefly it in a nutshell. To find out further information about the Work Matters, Europe Direct, or libraries in general, just email us there on the details there, or call into any of our branches around the city and county, or you can follow us on our social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. Our website has masses of information about all of our library services. There's a dedicated Work Matters page there, a Europe Direct page as well, and all our contact details are there. And as everyone else has said earlier on, I'm quite happy to answer questions at the end if anybody has anything to ask, find out about libraries. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sinead. And having rejoined the library recently, actually, I was delighted to see a lot of change in the library since I was there as a child, and it's a fantastic service. So
Yeah, so as I said, I'd try and keep it brief, get us back
Yeah.
on schedule for lots of time for questions at the end.
Yeah,
You
perfect.
kept it so brief, Sinead. I'd just like to say that, you know, we would like to thank the library services because we use them kind of quite a bit, and in using the study spaces, the library in Central Lane accommodates a program that we run for very vulnerable migrants. So they could be victims of human trafficking, undocumented, victims of domestic violence, whatever, 3 mornings a week when COVID didn't interrupt us, and that is a very successful program as well, and that is for people that wouldn't normally engage in any type of service provision. So it's a safe space. It at the moment, that particular group is for women, it's run by women, it's for women, it's all female tutors. So again, we're looking out for the dignity and the safety you know, of the people that use that course. So it's a fantastic space for us. So just to say that, Sinead, and all that you said, you forgot to mention. For us, one of our most important things. So thanks for that.
Okay, I'm sorry about that, Anne.
No
but
problem.
as I said, if I was to talk about libraries, I'd be here till next week because we do so much. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And actually, Anne, that just on that point, there is I see a question in relation to safe spaces, and somebody said here that there's a highlighted question for migrants, and migrants, something that comes up obviously is a lack of a safe space for operations for the forum due to confidentiality for practical purposes. So it's just touching a little bit on what you said. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add to that, you know, or it's kind of, I think it's a question around a meet-up location or somewhere where people can feel secure, I guess. Sorry, Anne, you're back on mute.
Okay, so what I would say is where we are physically operating from at the moment is more or less an admin space for us, but we're already, you know, working on identifying a more suitable, larger space. We always provided a one-stop shop, and we want to kind of get back to that model. And, you know, we have been doing this work since 2006, which is not today or yesterday, I can tell you. And like I said, we have built up relationships of trust within different communities. Having said that, we have new emerging communities that would never have normally engaged with us before. And Richard gave the example there earlier on that particularly during COVID, the Brazilian communities would have contacted us because they lost their jobs. A lot of them were working in the meat and boning plants. And I suppose just to say a little bit about that is that they had a double hit here, certainly in the southeast region anyway, because the meat and boning plants prior to COVID had already been hit because there had been I suppose setbacks, you know, with the pricing of beef. So there had been kind of pickets on the meat and boning plants. So they had been closed for a while for that, and then they were only just recovering when the COVID piece hit. So, you know, it really was a double whammy. Anybody that had some money set aside had been used up in both those situations. So, like I said, the Brazilian community is not really a community that would engage with our services. There is no need. They're here as economic migrants. So there's emerging communities all the time as well, and new communities coming in. For example, the tranche of Syrians. We've also had Rohingya coming through the area that's settled in Carlow in the southeast, and we provide remote supports to other groups like that. And we are expecting now a number of Afghanistan families to come into Waterford, you know, to join other families in the community here. But also, having said that, we cannot take for granted that there are people here for 8, 10 and 12 years that have been undocumented for a large number of those years. And, you know, there's concerns now that they will be highlighted because of other communities coming into the area. So yeah, the safe spaces is very important to us. And we do provide kind of a confidential service. We operate at the moment on an appointments basis because of the tight space that we have. So nobody kind of crosses anybody else kind of coming in or going out. We feel that that's very important as well. So we would agree with the comments, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Anne, for that. And that brings us to our final speaker. So I'm delighted to ask Mark Mabanda, the coordinator of the Migrant Integration Strategy, to join us. Mark, I see you're there, so hopefully you're ready to go. I will hand over the floor to you.
Thanks, Alison, and thanks everyone who is in this room. And in these 5 minutes, I think I have nothing to say. That is the beauty of becoming the last speaker. You are like the last born. A last born, normally you sit and then appreciate what the family has done. I have nothing to add on what has been said, but only thing when we were preparing this gathering, I talked to a couple of people who are in situation of not having legal papers to live in Ireland. But previously, I have been encountered so many. Even myself, at one time, not in Ireland, but I was what we call in our area in the Great Lakes region, illegal immigrants in some part. It is, the feeling is always the same. Talking to people around here in Waterford, I feel the same as the way I felt when I was in Bujumbura, in Kampala, in Bukoba, Tanzania. The same stigma, the same inhumane that we feel is the same. For example, I talked to one person who mentioned the fear that he has when he sees the Mormons. These people, you see, Mormons are religious people moving around, spreading the good news, but the fear that they have, we all have the same stigma, the same fear that they do have. Another thing that I would just, which has never been mentioned, is the prevention. Preventing is better than a cure. Like right now, you hear people talking about UK that is in a crisis of workers, but people that are being lied to come to the UK are so many. And when the people are coming to UK, they end up being here, and sometimes they could be illegal. I mean, they could be in a situation of becoming undocumented. So that is I would wish that we would perhaps start the process of educating the world about a situation that lead to become undocumented. That is one thing. By talking to many immigrants from around the world, lies is the key. Lies to come here. Either you come to work in the factory, either you come as a student. The promise to be in heaven is real. People come here promised to pay a lot to get educated, and after education, you are coming here, you will get a job and you achieve your dreams. So that is something that I wanted to highlight that has not been mentioned. If there is any way somehow that we can educate the world to prevent the situation that can lead to become undocumented, and the fear is real. You have been mentioned, I think the previous speakers just mentioned it, and I have seen myself, as I said, I have been in a situation, but the only problem, as one guy challenged me, I said, I know how I feel because I felt that when I was in Kampala, Uganda. I said, no, in Uganda, it is better. He said, in third world countries, it is better than here, because in there, either in Brazil or Venezuela or elsewhere, you can buy your legal status. If you're arrested by the police, you just pay the bribe and then you move on. Here, there is no way you stay in limbo forever. And he said, the most dangerous thing is to fear a fellow human being. That's so. Without just 5 minutes without going around and around, I just want to request everyone in this room at least to know one person and how that person can be supported. And that's also an issue. We don't know the statistics, even the government, even people concerned, to know at least one person, either as an individual, you make effort to know one person who is undocumented. That will be very helpful in this situation where we're going to be a process of regularization. So it will be so much helpful, and even to know the data around undocumented migrants. So once again, I thank you. I have no much to say. It is only 5 minutes. I just wanted to share my little experience, and we will continue to explore that route, spreading our wings, as Anne says, and indeed, Ajid echoed Anne's word for almost 15 years. Always she said, we are all humans. Don't say I am from here. Don't say I am from there. We are all humans. That's in every meeting. That's why the buzzword that I've been hearing from Anne and Ajid mentioned it this morning. Other than that, I thank you once again, and I hope that we will do something. There will be something coming out of this meeting, something small, like knowing at least one person each in this room, or employing a person to know a person who is undocumented, because that is the most difficult task that to do in this situation, and even the days to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark, and that's a fantastic way to finish up the mornings or the afternoon speakers. So thank you so much for that. Okay, I know that I think I'm going to check the questions. I know there was another comment in the chat, so look, we'll open it up. If anybody would like to ask any further questions of our panel, please do so in the Q&A function, or you can put in a comment for the chat, and we're happy to read those out and to maybe discuss those. So I did see a comment earlier from Dara, and he commented that undocumented migrants have been vulnerable to multiple forms of exploitation and abuse, particularly in employment. He said, despite this, they have hesitated to report such abuse to the authorities for the fear of deportation. And that it is even worse, the competent authorities sometimes or oftentimes perceive repatriation as a form of compensation for undocumented migrant workers who have been the victims of human trafficking for the purposes of forced labour. And he said, in this case, what should we do to help those undocumented migrants to realise their right of access to justice in accordance with international human rights standards? So I think that's a pretty big question, an important question from Dara. I don't know if anyone would like to comment on that.
I suppose, Alison, we had, many occasions where people came forward where they were in exploitative situations, in the labour market. And at the end of the day, people, have families to feed, and, they have like financial and other commitments as well. But we try and help them to see that they can become regularized, and, once they do that, then they are in a better situation in terms of health and safety protections and all the other rights that the rest of us kind of, access. In terms of, holiday time, a pay packet at the end of the week. We had several examples where people had worked supposedly, for a month and be paid at the end of the month, and at the end of the month came and they weren't paid. And when they said that they were going to, report they hadn't been paid, they were told they were going to be reported for not being legal. So that fear, that balance of the scales is there all the time. People are looking over their shoulders all the time. So, that's a concern for us. We were supposed to have Ethel Buckley from SIPTU today. Obviously, there's something gone amiss there because Ethel hasn't been able to join us. But we will have a discussion after this, a roundtable discussion, and hopefully Davy Lane, who's the local SIPTU representative, can give us a little bit of feedback on that. But we are working with the unions, and we constantly bring this to the forefront to say, what can we do? We need to be doing more to protect people that are in exploitative situations, whether they're undocumented or not. So there will be an opportunity, hopefully, then for us to have, a conversation shortly after this session ends. So that's all I could say to you about it at the moment. We do help people kind of around that situation. They assume because they don't have status that they don't have rights. We say, no, that's not the case. Every human being has the right to dignity, respect, employment, all the usual, access to education, health, housing, whatever, regardless of your status and regardless of where you're from. Mark has just kind of reiterated that for us. And just to say that Mark actually is the coordinator for the Migrant Integration Strategy. So we'll be working on implementation and working with communities and activities out and about. He will undoubtedly come across undocumented people in his role of doing outreach work. So, you know, that's another layer for us in terms of here's another way that we can reach out to people as well who wouldn't normally kind of come into the office space. So we're looking forward to building that as a service as well. But that's all I could say to the comments to Dara at the moment. I think I know who you are, Dara, so we can have another conversation later on as well. There's no problem with that. Okay, so thanks for that.
Thank you, Anne. I don't know if anybody else would like to come in on that. Hi, Catherine. Can you?
Hi, sorry.
Joined us after an IT issue. Catherine, you're back. It's good to see you.
Oh, stop. The whole thing was just a nightmare. It's like the house exploded. So apologies to all of the speakers that I missed, but just in response to the particular question there, I suppose the difficulty is that it's a known kind of controlling mechanism in many different situations that people are told that they'll be reported to the authorities and they'll get deported as a fait accompli, and that's not correct. So the difficulty is for many people is, first of all, it's getting access to people who can provide them with reliable either information or legal advice about their situation, but not necessarily to rely on misinformation that can circulate within the community. Of course, I wouldn't want to give somebody false hope that in their individual case things may work out perfectly, but at least it is important to be aware of the fact that people can seek to access information, get good, correct information about their specific case, including access to remedies for workplace violations, for example, and to recover wages, but more particularly to regularise their immigration status. Now, the Department of Justice doesn't publish information on the fact that it is guaranteed to offer a positive decision to any individual in a particular set of circumstances. But I think many service providers will acknowledge that alongside the perhaps total lack of transparency that is there within the system, that actually the Department of Justice can also respond very humanely to individual circumstances that are made known to them and outside of a formal deportation process. But also just to underscore for people who are here today and who may perhaps be undocumented, that there is no power on the part of the minister to just simply issue deportation orders against foreign nationals. So at least there is the possibility of engaging with the department to seek a remedy prior to it ever coming close to that formal outcome, perhaps, that in some cases clearly deportation orders do issue. But like it's usually a long process before that occurs, and simply engaging doesn't mean that that's the automatic consequence of engaging. And it's really important again to just to reach out, I think, to organisations like WIN, like CrossCare here today, like NASC in Cork, like ourselves here in the Immigrant Council, to seek information about the individual facts of each case and to see if a remedy may be available to them, including, as I say, for workplace remedies or other access to services that they may require. So, you know, there's a lot of good stuff that sometimes happens that can be very difficult to access if you're not aware of it. But, you know, even our High Court this year, for example, provided access to services for undocumented pregnant women, for example, and that's often something that people are unaware of and they're reluctant to seek access to health treatment, for example, where they need it. And Richard in particular would be able to underscore. Apologies, Richard, you may have touched on it in your presentation, but I was struggling with a blaring alarm. Undocumented migrants with acute health issues often are able to regularize their situation, and Richard has been dealing with some really very complicated cases to do with organ transplants, and while they're obviously on a spectrum, very complex cases and not the norm, it has been possible to achieve positive outcomes in those cases completely outside of a deportation process, for example, and to get them dealt with effectively and efficiently. So I would just encourage people to sometimes go to reliable service providers and not to rely perhaps on misinformation, although I do understand obviously how reluctant people can be to come forward, so I don't want to make it sound like that's an easy decision for anybody. Thanks.
Thanks very much, and good to have you back. Thank you. I don't see any other questions popping up in the chat, and I am just conscious of time. There's a few people very generously putting in comments to thank all of the panelists here today for your time and for your contributions. And I would also like to thank you very much for your time and contributions. And I will hand over to Anne because I'm sure that Anne has some closing remarks that she would like to share.
I kind of didn't, Alison, but look, thank you so much for that. I would just like to say, you know, thank you, especially to all our speakers and panelists today, without which this webinar wouldn't have happened. We appreciate the effort that everybody has to make in an extremely busy schedule. We had invited other speakers as well who couldn't be with us for other reasons. You know, it's a time when people are returning after COVID, and you know, things are very amplified maybe for some organisations and some people as well. Special thanks would go to the Central Library, to Sinead Cummins and Sinead O'Higgins in particular, who have facilitated this online process. We had to change to an online delivery at the last minute. Obviously, you know, people may be aware that Watford and Kerry have been, I suppose, announced as the two highest areas of concern with COVID at the moment. So we didn't want to be compromising or putting anybody at risk. So hence the 100% online facility at the moment. So thank you very much to those. Again, to all the speakers, especially to IOM, who have facilitated financially this event happening today. It's something that we spoke about 2 years ago. So it's very timely for us that it's happening now, hopefully just prior to the announcement of the regularisation scheme, that things have been finalised there shortly. I think people are putting a lot of emphasis on the scheme, and we just hope that we don't see people kind of disappointed that, you know, as somebody said earlier on, that people don't put all their eggs in the one basket, you know, and that we look at other opportunities and other options for them as well. We think and we hope that this will only be a starting point for us here in Waterford. We'll go on to do a short roundtable discussion in a few minutes, and we'll start looking constructively then at what are the next steps. I would say, Alison, in particular with yourself, thank you so much for your engagement and your support in terms of, like, you know, academic institutions are sometimes forgotten about in these contexts, and it's so important for us because, you know, there's plenty of areas of research that really need looking at here. Data collection is just one of those. It would be a great starting point, and I think we need to start to have a level of conversations around how we go about doing that. You know, the undocumented is such a difficult group to not only to access, but also to document in terms of reporting and what is successful. Talawani said it earlier on, and how do we move things forward. But again, all of these services have to be looked at in terms of what is the financial cost as opposed to, like, what is the social cost to people living in society. As I said earlier, we want to make sure that the statement of Waterford being the best place to live in Ireland is true for everybody who lives in the area. So huge thank you to everybody, but most of all, thank you to all our participants that linked in from the communities. You have all been very welcome, and we hope to engage with you all again very shortly. So thank you, Alison.
Thank you very much, Anne. And I think that wraps up our proceedings. So I hope to see you all soon, and hopefully to work with you all again into the future as well. So thank you all. Take care.